And this one doesn't hold tune as well, so if you'll be patient with me while I retune real quick. There we go. He is jealous for me. Love's like a hurricane. I am a tree bending beneath the weight of his wind and mercy. When all of a sudden I'm unaware of these afflictions eclipsed by glory, and I realize just how beautiful you are, how great your affections are for me. Oh, how he loves us so. Oh, how he loves us, how he loves us all. Jealous for me. Love's like a hurricane. I am a tree bending beneath the weight of his wind and mercy. When all of a sudden I am unaware of these afflictions eclipsed by glory, and I realize just how beautiful you are now, great your affection are for me. Oh, how he loves, yes, he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves, he loves. We are his portion, and he is our prize, drawn to redemption by the grace in his eyes. If grace is an ocean, we're all sinking. So heaven meets earth like an unforeseen kiss, and my heart turns finally inside of my chest. I don't have time to maintain these regrets when I think about the way, oh, how he loves us so. Oh, how he loves us, how he loves us all. How he loves, yeah, he loves us. Oh, he loves us. Oh, he loves us. Oh, he loves, he loves, yeah, he loves us. Oh, he loves us. Oh, he loves us. Oh, he loves, he loves.
Now, first things first, if this is your cup, I'm going to put it on the front pew because of everything I'm sure of and not sure of in the world, I am positive that if I leave it there, I'm kicking it out into the thing at some point, not on purpose. I'm just not the most coordinated fellow. I want to remind everybody that, or everybody who is a teenager or is in some way tangentially related to a teenager, we are having the teen Bible study at our house this evening from 6 to 8, and there's a rumor about the food that we serve tonight being a bit special, and it might involve the gentleman's, so you can figure out the mystery there or not. Do you feel like I took your award away from you? Is that what you feel like? It's not the way it works. I just said it's related. You could be picking up McDonald's, man. Um, Also, if you would like to follow along in the YouVersion Bible app for our sermon notes, you can open the YouVersion Bible app and go into the menu, pick events, pick North Augusta Church. Surprise, that's us, so that's our notes. It's been kind of a weird week, hasn't it? It's really, really interesting, and there's really only two things that I'm going to say about the election. They're not the bulk of the sermon, but they do have to do with the introduction. If you've been around here much at all, you know that there are times, not every year, but a lot of years, I will do a series on gratitude around Thanksgiving. And I'll do a 21-day challenge where you have actual things that you go through for 21 days. There's some benefits to that. I'll talk about that later. I was back and forth on whether or not I wanted to do something about that this year or not. I was kind of leaning towards not this year, just because you don't want it to become common enough that people just kind of go on autopilot and no, he's doing that thing again. But then this week happened, and we got to the end of an extraordinarily contentious election. And the thing that was so weird to me was that when it was done, it's been stunningly silent. Like, I've lived through a lot of elections, and it was so interesting because, and a little bit disconcerting actually, because when this one was over, there was really almost nothing from either side. Nothing really from their supporters. I really haven't seen anything. I've seen much less around town from either side of things. It was just stunningly silent. And whatever's going on there, and I think it's probably a bunch of things, but one thing I'm pretty sure about, a part of it is that everybody on all sides, no matter how their candidate did, is exhausted by this. Just drained and exhausted. It's like everybody took a beating, like the whole country took a beating. And I need to say that because I need to say this. However you feel about the election, and in this room, there are very different opinions on that. However you feel about how the election came out, not only is everybody exhausted, you need to take on board, and I need to take on board, that we have Christian brothers and sisters in this room and beyond who are happy about how the election came out. Their faith informs why they're happy about how the election came out. They will show you scripture. It comes from a place where they were trying to honor God with their vote. The other side of that coin that we don't talk about enough, I don't think, is that you have Christian brothers and sisters who are in just as good a status as you with God, who read their Bible an awful lot, who worship God just like you do, with the same enthusiasm you do, and who, because of their faith, voted otherwise. And they are devastated. They're devastated. And they're your Christian brothers and sisters, and they weren't straying off the path and saying, well, I'm going to vote for evil now. Neither one of the sides were doing that. If you can actually listen to either side and somebody that you love and respect who voted for either side, you'll find that their vote was very informed by their faith. And to a degree, there may be a little Romans 14 thing going on there, where it's like, okay, the Bible didn't really tell you a candidate to vote for. Like, you're not going to find notes. I mean, you're not going to find like a name unless somebody gives you one of those weird codes where you take every third letter in Genesis. Those are never right, by the way. Your first clue is that it's a translation. Those weren't what the original words were. And all of that's to say that in this weird space, oh, by the way, both candidates claim to be, both candidates are self-professed Christians if you listen to them, both of them. I'll leave it to you to research who actually goes to church, how much, and that kind of thing, but both of them are. So in some sense, based on their words, those are our, we have Jesus in common. Which really disturbs me about the way that people talked about various candidates who are supposed to be their brother and sister in Christ and what we justified, because, mind you, I'm not talking about how you voted. I'm talking about behavior through the campaign. And if we were willing to opt out of the way that we're supposed to treat other brothers and sisters, even if they're running for elected office, if we had to resort to character assassination on either side, and it was done on both sides, then we kind of sold out Jesus and said we had our faith in something bigger. It's not actually bigger. It's just what we were trusting in more. So in the wake of all that, where we all feel like we've taken a beating, even the people whose candidate won are just too exhausted to say a whole lot about it. The first 2 days of this week, I tried to figure out what I was going to talk about. I was like, it's not going to be the gratitude thing. I've done that. And then by the end of the day, Tuesday, I thought, you know what? If we ever needed to go back and focus on gratitude, if we ever needed to go through something as a church where we're going through these practices, and you'll understand why I'm saying this as we go through the sermon today, it may be now. If there's ever been a time to preach on cultivating gratitude, practicing gratitude in our lives, and what that will do for us as a community, it's now. So I'm done talking about the election. It seemed equally weird if I didn't mention it. But I wanted you to know why I ultimately decided to land on this. Because whatever side of that you were on, listen to me. You need this. You need to cultivate this in your life. You need to refresh and renew this in your life. It absolutely, 100%, without question, something I don't normally say, will have notable positive impacts in your life. There are no exceptions to this. It's the only thing that I really get up here and say, you've heard me, I get up and say, well, you know, some people think this, some people think this, I think this, but this might work, this probably will, this could bring in, I'm saying will. 100% guaranteed will. And I've got the science to back it up. So, let's get into unlocking gratitude in our lives. If you've got a Bible, or if you want to look up the screen, or if you're looking in the notes, turn to Colossians chapter 3, starting in verse 12. Colossians chapter 3, starting in verse 12. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Now, if you're sharp, if you're paying attention, you might say, Adam, I don't mean to tell you your business, but I read through that passage, and that doesn't mention gratitude once. Well, my brothers and sisters, you're right. It doesn't, because this is setting up what I want to talk to you about, the passage I want to talk to you about, but I don't think you can understand the passage that's coming next unless we understand this one. This is set up. This is a part of the thought. So what does he say? He says, clothe yourselves. And we've talked about that, even being clothed with Christ. That it's this intentional move to put these things on. It takes effort. It takes intention. It's not just, hey, sit back, relax, pray, and we'll put some gratitude on you. It's clothe yourselves with gratitude. Decide to cultivate this in your life, precisely because it's probably not at the level that it needs to be for a follower of Jesus who believes that God is trustworthy and makes good on his promises. So it's going to take effort. It's going to take you doing something. It's not just a little switch you flip in your head. It's a spiritual discipline. Practices that don't come naturally, that you start to do intentionally, that begin to shape you. It's one of the ways that God molds you. One of the ways God brings it out in your life. And for centuries, Christians have done this. They've had practices that they do on purpose. Some of them communal, some of them individually, but knowing the other ones are doing it. And it's as a means of, this is a way that we see that God uses to mold and shape us into the image of Jesus Christ. I'm telling you, I hope I do a good job with this sermon. It's my job. I've been doing it for a while now. I hope it's okay. But it's really not a matter of you getting to the end of the sermon and going, yes, I agree with him, and now I'm grateful. It doesn't work that way. We're going to be talking about gratitude for 3 weeks. You listen to all 3 sermons, and all 3 of them go, yes, I agree with you. I am grateful now. No, you're not. It's not just flipping a switch. It's deciding to intentionally engage in practices that are not natural to shape you in a certain way, to form habits that are healthy, that are positive, that lead you closer to being like Christ. And in our society, in our day and age, particularly with spirituality for some reason, that's not a popular idea. It's fascinating to me because people are somewhat religious with their meditation apps. People are somewhat religious with their walks around the neighborhood. There are all kinds of little habits that we have, a lot of them that aren't that great for us. And we pretend like we're not being shaped by those things. Yes, you are. Unless you're the exception to human beings. P.S. You're not. We decide to engage in spiritually formative activities so that our hearts, so that our minds, so that our behavior shifts to become this, so that it cultivates godly things in our lives that lead us closer to God and closer to being the kind of people Jesus would be in the world if he were us. That's the extra step to what would Jesus do, by the way. Otherwise, you're left with wear robes, have a beard. The real question is, what would Jesus do if he were you? If he lived in your house and in your neighborhood, if he was married to your spouse, if he had your kids, if he had your job. What would Jesus do in those situations? Because those are situations that are about discipleship. Not just what would Jesus do in that part of the world all that time ago. It's okay, follower of Jesus. Little Christ is what the word means. If you're a follower of Jesus, what does Jesus do in your situation? So some of these things we have to intentionally cultivate. We have to engage in practices that are formative. So what does he say here? Clothe yourselves with compassion, humility, gentleness, and patience. These are things that you are supposed to put on. And that implies that it's going to take effort, by the way. It's going to implies that these are not just natural things for people. You are going to have to decide. I love the metaphor because it actually really carries the idea. You put on compassion. Because a lot of things in the world can take the compassion right out of us, can take the empathy right out of us. One of them is a political campaign, by the way. Okay, 2.5 things about the election. Kindness. I told you before, I'll say it again. I won't spend a lot of time on it because we talked about it extensively before. Christians in the first century were so known for being kind that there are 2 words in Greek. One of them is Christos, meaning which we get Christ from. One of them is Christos, which means kind one. They're pronounced identically. They're spelled visually differently. And it's amazing that when people who weren't Christians in the world wrote about Christians, the spelling mistake they very consistently made was to call them Christians, which means kind ones or followers of the kind one. Now, was it a mistake? Absolutely it was a mistake. But it was the right mistake to make. And their behavior backed it up to where they thought, oh, that must be what they're saying. They were so kind that that was the obvious answer to people observing their behavior. People who weren't Christians, by the way, observing their behavior. So you put on compassion, kindness, humility. Not something we're prone to. Humility says, you know what, I don't already have everything figured out. Humility says, you know what? I got a 3-pound brain and an infinite God. It's possible there's a gap in my knowledge and who He is. Gentleness. What about if it's really important? What if I'm really scared? Clothe yourselves with kindness, compassion, humility, gentleness. Oh, and one more. Patience. How many people would say, you know what comes really natural to me? Patience. I'm just demonstrating how to raise your hand in case you've never seen that before. I'm not actually saying that's me. No, these are things that you have to intentionally put on. You have to intentionally do things to cultivate them in your lives because they're not states to which most of us normally trend. Bear with each other. Bear with who? Well, are they another? Them. Are they a person that's not you? Them. Forgive each other. Okay, I got this, but you got to be smart. Forgiveness. I know we're pro-forgiveness, but man, you got to be smart about it. People got to deserve it. That's why He keeps talking. Forgive each other as the Lord forgave you. There go all my excuses. Because God forgave me because I deserved it? No. Because I haven't really done anything to need forgiveness? No, if you're claiming that, you don't know a whole lot about Christianity. God forgave me because I fully understood everything that I had done wrong and properly apologized for every action. Nope. Grace all the way, man. You enter through grace. Grace is your new worldview. You don't get to claim grace for yourself and then try to make sure everybody else gets what they deserve. That doesn't work, and Jesus is quite serious about it and is not subtle about it. Inserts it in the Lord's Prayer, explains it immediately after the Lord's Prayer, tells a bunch of parables about it. He's not playing. You don't get to accept grace and forgiveness for yourself and then withhold it from others. And above all, well, that all sounded pretty important. You got something ahead of that? Put on love. Put on love. Make the effort to put on love, even where it's not, no, especially where it's not easy. Why put on love? Why is it above all? Because it binds them all together. All of those things that we just talked about, love is the thing that connects them. Love is the thing that makes them whole. Love is the thing that gives them meaning. According to Jesus, all of the law and the prophets, every command in the Bible is completely worthless without love. You could follow every one of them and miss it. However, the opposite side is, but if you love God with everything that you are and everything that you got, and you love your neighbor as yourself, you're going to get the rest of it because all the law and the prophets hang on these two. All right, so what does that lead into? Pick up in verse 15. And again, this is a continued thought. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body, you were called to peace. By the way, as I go through this passage, listen for words that have to do with thankfulness, gratefulness, that kind of thing. And you see how short a passage it is. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you are called to peace, and be thankful. Let the message of Christ dwell among you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through psalms, hymns, and songs of the Spirit, singing to God with gratitude in your hearts. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. So just a few sentences, one paragraph, Paul is nothing if not repetitive. But when he's repetitive, he does it very much on purpose because there is something that he is wanting to get across to you. There is something he wants you to understand about everything that he's talking about and the thread that goes through it that makes it possible. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. Not just general peace, actually Christ's peace. We've talked about that recently in another passage, but here's what's interesting about it here. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. And remember that you were called to peace. One of your callings as a follower of Jesus, one of your callings as a Christian, one of your callings as a part of the church itself is that we were called to peace. Inner peace, peace in the world, all of the above. All of the above. Peace of Christ dwell in your hearts. Does that mean you have an inner peace? Yes. But you know what? If the peace of Christ dwells in your hearts, you're also going out there and making peace. You also remember that in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Do you know why they'll be called children of God? Because the peacemakers resemble him. Oh, those must be God's kids. Who else would be doing that in the world? So let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. You were called to peace. Now, even so, that's still a difficult thing to do sometimes, right? I mean, I've seen the news. The internet makes the world really, really small, so we know of horrible things that are going on all over the world pretty much instantly. There's a lot out there to disrupt your peace. Not only that, there's certain people that come into your life that seem to disrupt your peace like instantly, on sight. So that sounds great, Jesus. I would be all for your peace dwelling in my heart. I understand that you called me to it, but I could use some steps. Give me 3 steps to Jesus' peace? What are we doing? He says, keep listening. And this is interesting to me too. And remember, Paul's a lawyer, so that's kind of how he constructs a lot of his arguments. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you are called to peace, period, and to be thankful, period. Doesn't that feel kind of shoehorned in? Like, let the peace of Christ, blah, 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 blah. Oh, and be thankful. And then he talks about something else. It seems weirdly inserted. It's like, oh yeah, I got to remind him to be thankful. And if that's all it was, that's what you would be kind of left with, but it's not all it is. Let the message of Christ dwell among you richly as you teach and admonish each other with gratitude in your hearts. Okay, so the peace of Christ thing, be thankful. Let the message of Christ dwell richly among you. That's going to cause you to teach and admonish one another and do all these things with gratitude in your heart. Okay, there's thankfulness again, gratitude again. Whatever you do, and Paul does this all the time, man. He'll make a list, and he'll be like, okay, this thing, I think I can cover that. And then he'll say something like this. And whatever you do, or say, do it all in the name of the Lord. So pretty much, we've narrowed it down to all of your actions and words. Which ones, which actions, which words? Because I'd really like to put my energy in the right place. Well, pretty much all of them. How am I going to do that? Giving thanks to God the Father through him. How am I going to let the peace of Christ rule in my heart? Answer that call to peace that we have? Be thankful. How am I going to let the message of Christ dwell richly among us? So that we can teach and admonish one another with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. How am I going to do that? There's so much else that's intruding in the world. There's so many things, whether it's people with their own agendas who are trying to get me on board for them, or if it's just people selling products that want to tell me that this is what's missing from my life. If I just had these special new $50 socks, then the world would make sense, man. Today I'd buy some of those socks. They wouldn't work, but that moment of hope might help. Paul believes that thanksgiving, gratitude, is what makes each of these things possible. He doesn't have like gratitude Tourette's. He's not just talking about things and goes, thankful. It's not that kind of thing. He's actually weaving it in because he wants you to understand this is what underlies all of it. This is what makes it possible. A person who approaches God with gratitude, a person who is in the world. You were called to this as a Christian. It is an inextricable part of your call. Number 2, search back. We're actually, I know it isn't Thanksgiving yet, but you know how Walmart does. It's all, Halloween, Santa Claus, and turkeys. Chloe walks into Walmart and they're playing Jingle Bells. She says, not yet. And Paul agrees. But we're getting into that season, and then there's gift giving and that kind of thing. Have you ever given a gift to somebody, and maybe you put a little bit of thought into it, you tried to do something really special, and they just didn't seem grateful for it at all? How's that feel? Doesn't feel good. Does it encourage you to put that much effort into it again? I mean, maybe you do a year or two. Okay, this time I'm really going to get it. This time it'll get a reaction. Spoiler. It won't. But on the other hand, some of you around, you knew Chloe when she was Chloe, right? Little Chloe, looked like a Pixar cartoon child. Chloe Ellis was the most grateful human being. She still kind of is. But man, you loved giving stuff to Chloe. Those eyes go cartoon big, the smile breaks out, you're full of joy because you're giving her your stuff. You couldn't wait to give her something else. Because of the gratitude you show, because of how much it showed that she appreciated it. She knew. She knew that you were doing something you did not have to do. And let's be clear, gifts to be gifts have to be something that you didn't have to do. Much like gifts that you pay for aren't gifts, even if you wrap them. Thanksgiving is the thing, gratitude is the thing that underlies all of these things and makes it possible. I believe this so strongly that I will tell you that if you cultivate gratitude in your life, there are certain things about Christianity that don't seem directly related to it that will become easier in your life because you have done this. There are things that you will find yourself doing that don't seem directly related to this that will spring out of it. A few years ago when I started looking into gratitude for the first time, and really I was looking for a Thanksgiving sermon. It really was as simple. I would love to tell you I had this deep philosophical thing that made me go into it. I did not. I was like, Thanksgiving's coming up. Oh my gosh, I'm out of time. I got to look up some stuff on gratitude. And it opened up this rabbit hole for me that I did not know was there. I ran across a guy named Dr. Robert Emmons. He's from UC Berkeley, University of California. And he is a psychology professor. And several years ago, some conference, I forget the name of it, but they decided to do something that was basically on the human virtues. That's not what they called it, but that's essentially what it was. And so what they do is they got several professors to say that they would present on various topics. They would look at, the virtue, and they present all the psychological research on it. And he said, and the reason that I chose gratitude is because I called late and that's what was left. So he gets gratitude because it's the last one and nobody else chose it. Then he starts to go look for the research and he finds there isn't any. There's one thing from like a study from the 1920s that's not even the point of the research that just kind of makes a reference to it, but that's it. And so he has to actually create the field of the science of gratitude. He's a fascinating guy. He's written all kinds of stuff. By the end of this, I'm going to give away one of his little books. Not by the end of the day, but during this series, I will do that to somebody just because I like getting them out there. But his research is fascinating. Here's what he says. Numerous psychological, physical, and social benefits are associated with gratitude. A host of recent studies have examined its effect on health and well-being, and these clinical trials, laboratory experiments, and large-scale surveys have revealed that the practice of gratitude has dramatic, lasting, and positive effects. Now listen to this, every time. That's what the science says. Every time. For example, keeping a gratitude diary, and let me be super clear about that before I even tell you the rest of the sentence. People ask me, because I'm a minister, do you journal? I guess the right answer would be I don't know, because every time anybody's bought me a journal, I've lost it before the day's over. No, I'm not really a journaler. And so honestly, when I first started reading this research, I would see gratitude journal, gratitude diary, my eyes would glaze over, and I would just kind of go down to the next thing. But then I listened to more of what he said, and I read more of his research. And actually what he's talking about isn't like some big, wrought out thing. Like if that's your thing, then do it that way, sure. But really, he's just talking about 2 or 3 sentences every day with the theme of gratitude. And it reminded me, my mom, she's retired now, but my mom used to be a counselor. And one of the things that she encountered in her counseling was there were a lot of people that were coming in several years ago, and they were just so angry all the time, and they couldn't figure out why. But it was disrupting lots of things in their life. And my mom's suggestion, which I think was brilliant, she said, okay, try this. Turn off all 24-hour news networks and talk radio. And instead of that, just listen to music that you listened to when you were a teenager or something. Music that made you happy. Just in those spaces, do that instead. Just do it for a couple weeks. And they would gripe and complain, and they would, that kind of thing. And they really, really didn't want to do it, but she convinced them, and they were paying her, so. And she said it was amazing. Like, they're still really sort of reluctant in the beginning, and if you read the first few entries, they're like, the cheese wasn't bad in the refrigerator, stuff like that. But the farther it went, the more engaged it was, the more that they started to notice. And the more that they went into it, their way of being in the world changes. The way they interpreted the world changed. They became happier people. Let me be as clear as I know how to be. In this situation and in the ones that Robert Emmons describes, it is not that the circumstances of their life changed. They did not. At least not in the frame of time that I'm talking about. But these people were happier and more engaged in that world. Moreover, these people were able to see the good that was there all along that they had not seen. If you hear anything from me, I hope it's a lot, but if you hear anything from me, this would be one of them. I believe with all of my heart that in this world, what you look for, you will find. And if you are looking to be critical, you're going to find a lot to be critical about, and you're going to be irritated and bitter and not a pleasant person to be around. It's also going to twist your reading of Scripture. It's also going to twist your view of God. And you will be unaware of it. I'll remind you, several years ago, John Gottman and his wife Julie came out with some research. They are, in my view, they are the best marriage relationship researchers out there right now. Their whole approach was not just, here's our theory, let's see if it's true. Gottman's approach was, I have no idea how relationships work, let's watch some. And so he'd bring people in and he would watch them, and they would notice that some of them were really bad at marriage and some of them were really good at marriage. And he was like, I wonder if people who are good at marriage have anything in common. And so they would document it. And then they figured out, hey, wait a minute. These things that they're doing, they're replicable. Other people could do it, and they could get these results. And so that's where his stuff comes on. He was interviewed by, I think it was The Atlantic several years ago, and they asked him, okay, this is all fascinating, but what's one thing that people could do right now that would change their marriages for the better? He said, oh, that's easy. He said, he said like this, he said, the masters of marriage, that's his term, the masters of marriage, here's what they have in common. They're constantly scanning the environment and their spouse for what they're getting right. They're constantly scanning for what they're doing well. They're constantly scanning for what there is there that's good that they can be grateful for. Which that sounds nice, but there was this next part that grabbed me. He said, it turns out that when someone develops a critical eye, where they're looking for the things to criticize, where they're looking for what's wrong, they miss 50%, fully half, of the good things that are taking place in their life that a third party would notice. And then he says this, and this is what really hooked me. He said, so it turns out the grateful perspective is actually a more realistic perspective on the world. A gratitude diary, 2 or 3 sentences a day. They did that for 2 weeks. It produced sustained reductions in perceived stress. 28%, if you want to know the figure. 28% lower perceived stress. Lower levels of depression by 16%, if you want to know that number, in healthcare practitioners. Now get that. That's not just in all people. That's in healthcare practitioners. Now, I understand it's not exactly the same. But have you even seen like a TV show about ERs and that kind of thing? I could get David to come up and tell you some stories, although we might have to say the closing prayer first because some of them are kind of rough. That is a stressful environment. The washout rate is enormous. And in that subset of the population, 28% less perceived stress that a person perceives about themselves, 16% lower depression. Gratitude is related to 23% lower levels of the stress hormone cortisol. When you're stressed, your body produces a hormone called cortisol. When people started practicing gratitude, no medication, none of that, when they started practicing gratitude in tangible ways, that stress hormone was reduced in their system by 20, is it 20? What is it? Numbers, I always got to look. Yeah, 23%. Just from practicing gratitude. No medical intervention. Dietary fat intake, people start paying attention. Dietary fat intake is reduced by as much as 25% when people keep a gratitude journal. They eat healthier. Because there's instructions in the margin of the journal on how to eat healthier? No. It's just what they do. Oh, check this one out. Writing a letter of gratitude. You understand what I'm saying? A particular person, you write a letter of gratitude. It's not just like a Hallmark card that says, I'm grateful for you. You actually go through, and the things that they've done in your life that you appreciate, you outline them, you tell them. And you either mail it or you set up an appointment to share it with them. Writing a gratitude letter reduced feelings of hopelessness in 88% of suicidal inpatients and increased levels of optimism in 94% of them. Let me break that down for you again. In a subset of the population that was so suicidal they had to be institutionalized for it, writing one gratitude letter, one, reduced feelings of hopelessness in 88% of the inpatient people who were suicidal. And increased levels of optimism in 94% of the people who were suicidal, so suicidal they were hospitalized for it. How well do you think it's going to work for you? You're not starting where they're starting. You're on better footing to start with. Oh, one more thing. Gratitude is related to 10% improvement in sleep quality in patients with chronic pain, 76% of whom had insomnia, and 19% lower depression levels. Have you ever known someone or have you been someone who's in chronic pain? You know how much that shapes and affects you. In that subset of the population, people who practice gratitude had a 10% improvement in their sleep quality. Again, sleep quality for those who had chronic pain. The reason for their insomnia is not hard to trace out, but gratitude improved it. And 19% lower depression levels in people with chronic, persistent pain. Do you think there's something to this? The first time I issued this challenge, I emailed Dr. Emmons. Took a shot. Don't know the guy. Didn't know the guy. I emailed him and I asked him about doing this challenge as a church. It turns out that Emmons had been kind of an agnostic when he started this research, and by the end of it, he re-embraced his faith. He actually even, well, I'll tell you about that in a minute. But, so I asked him about actually doing it with the church. And he said that he had done it, he goes to a really big church over in California, and he said he had done it for a Sunday school class, a rather large Sunday school class, and had produced some material for it. He said he never knew of a whole church that kind of did it together. Here's what he said to me. Concerning practicing gratitude, I've had somewhat of a change of opinion on that recently. When confronted with the facts about the benefits of practicing gratitude, people often decide to go for it. They say things like, if you're telling me that I will be more successful, happier, and healthier, and overall have better life outcomes, I'll sign up for that. Then they realize, like physical exercise, that it's not so easy. There are many different obstacles and potential roadblocks to gratitude that are not appreciated. I just don't think that you can get at gratitude directly, because trying to get that directly, the focus is then placed in the wrong position. The focus becomes on trying to be more grateful. We focus on ourselves. Yet gratitude is other focused by definition. It's self-transcendent. It's about what other people do for us, what they are providing for us, doing things for us that we can't give ourselves. If we take it on as a self-improvement project, we've got the focus on the wrong place. It becomes all about us. What can I do to become more grateful? And I think that can be very counterproductive. So I used to think that growing in gratitude required going out and getting what I didn't have. Then I realized that it involves simply living in the reality that has been there all along, the many ways in which my life is supported and sustained by others. This may be the most important message that you can communicate to your church about trying to become more grateful. Don't focus on yourself. It seems counterintuitive, but it works. So here's what we got. Dr. Emmons was also nice enough to send me the material that he created for his Sunday school class to take them through a 21-day challenge. And 21 days that's the amount of time. He says you'll start seeing some benefits pretty much immediately, but if you want to see sustained life change, 21 days is what does it. And that makes a lot of sense, because honestly, if you want to set any habit in your life, psychology will tell you if you'll do it consistently for 20 days, it's a habit. I mean, that really is. I say that's just science about ridiculous things all the time as a joke because it's hilarious, but that really is just science. So 21 days, and he says 21 days, I won't have to talk you into it anymore. The guide has been adapted from material written by Dr. Robert Emmons and is being used with the author's express permission. It's 7 sets of exercises. I give you something to do. It'll take about 10 minutes every day. Okay? And there's really just 7. And for 3 weeks, you do that 7 through the week, go in the next week, do the 7 again, go in the next week, do the 7 again. It'll be about different stuff. It'll work. Oh, and by the way, you won't necessarily connect with every single one of them. They're a little bit different. The reason that I'm having you go through it, it'll have a positive benefit anyway from you trying it, but I just want you to see what you'll connect with, because you'll connect with parts of this. There'll be parts of this you leave behind and say, I'm glad that works for somebody else. And there'll be parts of it that say, man, that works for me. That has done some stuff. And so this gives you an opportunity to kind of test drive them and see. It'll take you about 10 minutes. And I'm going to give you a couple really, really easy ways to do it. I plan on sending a link to that out to that day's activity in Flocknote and on Facebook. You'll be able to access them there. I also have a full packet that I'm going to put out as a PDF if you want a printable hard copy that you can just have and write on it, if you prefer that. That'll be there for you. If you don't want to mess with any internet stuff or computer stuff, and you come up to me right after church and you say, I'd like one of those booklets, I will go upstairs and print you out one, and you'll leave with it in your hand. 21 days, 10 minutes a day, I guarantee it will have positive and lasting results. If you do it. If you just, this sounds crazy for a preacher to say, if you just come every week, listen to me, say a bunch of amens, I'll be a little surprised. But if you do that, it's not going to get there. It won't. My whole job is to get you to try it. My whole job is to convince you to try something that you will not know until after you've done it, because some things can only be learned by experience. So I'm trying to persuade you. Because if you want to see a dramatic change in your life, if you want to see a dramatic change in the life of this church, if you want to see a dramatic change in our community, and frankly, if you want to see a change that will be noticeable in our world, I need just the people in this room, or maybe who are listening on the live stream, to do this. You want to see it just in your life? You do it, nobody else does it, you'll still see benefits. But, and I can't stress this enough, it will not happen unless you choose to do things that are not natural for you. Unless you set aside the 10 minutes, unless you do the stuff, you can't really come and tell me that it doesn't work. I'll make you a guarantee. If you do this stuff, if you do it all 21 days and you come to me and say, you know what, that was terrible. I feel worse about the world and farther from God. Again, I'll be a little surprised. I'll get up and say a retraction. If you want to prove me wrong, by all means. But do the work, because I'm not going to accept cheating. Do the work. I am fully confident, 100%. If you do this, it will have positive effects in your life. Not just floaty mental positive effects, although it does have noticeable, trackable. Oh, the other thing about the gratitude letter, one gratitude letter has the same effect as certain antidepressants on your system that last up to 6 months for one letter. If you will do this, you won't connect with every single practice, but you will be changed in a positive way. By all means, try it and tell me if it doesn't work, and I will retract it. It's not going to come up. Some of you know about Brene Brown because I talk about her incessantly. She says, I never talk about gratitude and joy separately for this reason. In 12 years, I've never interviewed a single person who would describe their lives as joyful, who would describe themselves as joyous, who was not actively practicing gratitude. She goes on to say, I use the word practicing because the research participants spoke of tangible gratitude practices, more than merely just having an attitude of gratitude or feeling grateful. In fact, they gave specific examples of gratitude practices that included everything from keeping gratitude journals and gratitude jars to implementing family gratitude rituals. Gratitude journals, we've already talked about, they're not extensive. The jar thing is a cool variation on it. You basically just put a jar out in your living room or something with a bunch of little notes, a piece of paper beside it, and a pen. And whenever anybody has something that they realize they're grateful for and they walk through the family room, they just write it down on the little piece of paper, fold it up, put it in the jar. And the whole family is able to watch the jar fill up. The whole family has a visual, constant reminder of how many things there are to be grateful for in their life. Family gratitude rituals. When we have both kids in the house, we made a big deal about there are exceptions sometimes, but we eat at the table as a family together. And one of the reasons that we did that is because they knew that one of the things we were going to do in that meal was to everybody talk about something that they had seen that they were grateful for in the day. Just what's your gratitude? Doesn't have to be real big or extensive, just you're going to have something. And the thing that we noticed was this. Number one, what you look for, you will find. When we knew that we had that ritual and we were going to have to say something, your eyes are open because you're looking for something to see. And what you look for, you'll find. Number two, we found that we had to put a limit on how many gratitudes that our kids were bringing to the table because we wanted to eat. Because the more that they did it, the more that they did it. You understand what I'm saying? It grows exponentially as you practice it. But I asked Dr. Emmons about resistance to journal writing or to practicing gratitude. Resistance to actually doing the practices. Because part of it is just it's hard for us to get anything new into the routine, isn't it? We got so much, we feel like we're cramming in everything into the space that we got. I'll float out there on the side that if you take the 10 minutes to do this, I think you'll be surprised at how the rest of the day goes, how much you'll be able to get done. You'll have to experience that to know it. But here's what he said to me. He said, what I've found is that any resistance to journaling or difficulty with journaling derives when people, what I have found is that any resistance to journaling or difficulty with journaling dissolves when people start to reap the benefits of doing it, which begin immediately. It is self-sustaining. I actually found that over half of the participants in one of my studies continued to write down their gratitudes long after the study had been completed, some 6 months later. This tells me that it was enjoyable and valuable for them. You will talk yourself out of doing this on the front end. You won't talk yourself out of it after it gets going. You hear me? You can absolutely convince yourself that you don't have time to do this, and you won't. Or you can decide to put it in, and you can learn. And it will be self-sustaining because you'll be able to see the benefits of it as you go. So let's finish up here. Gratitude and behavior. The author Anne Lamott says this. She says, gratitude begins in our hearts and then dovetails into behavior. It almost always makes you willing to be of service, which is where joy resides. It means that you're willing to stop being such a jerk. When you're aware of all that has been given to you in your lifetime and in the past few days, it's not hard to be humbled and pleased to give back. So may you allow the peace of Christ to rule in your hearts, because you, my brothers and sisters, were called to peace. And may you be thankful. May you allow the message of Christ to dwell richly among you as you teach and admonish one another with gratitude in your hearts. And whatever you do or say, may you do it all in the name of the Lord, giving thanks to God through him. And may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. And the church said together, amen.